Good afternoon. Hope everyone's having a very good day. Lots of learning, lots of networking. This is what it's all about. So today we're going to be talking about Project Online migration made easy and try to, demystify some of the questions that certainly I've been having with a lot of customers at the moment in terms of, okay, what we're going to be doing, given that, surprise, surprise, Project Online is going to be going the way of the dodo. So we're going to go into it in a bit more detail and hopefully give you a few tips and tricks, a few things to sort of go away and consider so you can manage this transition in the most effective way and still continue to benefit from a feature standpoint, from a capability standpoint, and all of that sort of good stuff there. So as introduced already, so I am Joe Griffin. I run our UK subsidiary, proMX UK Limited. Lots of nice, lovely acronyms after my name: MVP, MCT, CSM, WTF. That's how I guess I'm important, shall we say. I spend a lot of time talking about the Microsoft platform. I do a lot of community events as a most valuable professional. I was in Hamburg last week at the Coder Cloud event, and I will be at some more events later on this year. So you'll always hear me talking about the latest things: Power Platform, AI. Microsoft Foundry is mine and Sebastian's favorite topic at the moment as well. So this is all really interesting stuff. Please do give that QR code a bit of a scan there if we're not already connected. Happy to continue the conversation afterwards. Always happy to talk tech and all this sort of good stuff. So here is our agenda for today, and I'm just going to see if I can get rid of that really annoying little bar there because it's kind of a bit distracting. You don't want to see how many different browser tabs I've got open as well. That's not a really good way to introduce ourselves. Let's have a look. There we go. See. So we'll talk about the deprecation, what it means for you. We'll talk about the options, what's going to be next for you to sort of consider. We'll look at some of the technical hurdles, and we'll give you my totally not biased recommendation. It will be biased, just to warn you. And then we'll hopefully have time for Q&A towards the end. But if you do have questions during the session, then I'd like to keep sessions interactive. So just raise your hand, shout, scream, do a little dance, whatever's comfortable for you. We'll try and get your questions answered as we get through the session. So the evolution of the project platform or project sort of solution is kind of in sort of full flow. Here's what we've typically sort of seen in terms of the different options available. So obviously MPP, Project Desktop, has been around for donkey's years, as we say in the UK, for quite a long time. We've had the Project Server and Project Online sort of solutions, which kind of fit in with that sort of worldview, giving you kind of the best of both worlds, the ability to do your discrete planning in an MPP file, but then the ability to then synchronize this to a server and obviously manage more complex projects, initiatives, all this sort of good stuff. For those of you who are as old as me, you'll remember that project operations used to be called Project Service Automation. That's been around for about 10 years, I want to say now. I'm looking at Sebastian in the back to either shake his hand, shake his head, or something like that. Yeah, he's going like that. Okay, I'll take that. It's the last session of the day. I'll take that as a response for now, but certainly been around for a while. The benefit of this being is it fits in with the wider Dynamics 365 applications, sits behind Dataverse, which gives us a lot of benefits there from an extensibility standpoint, and as well offers the kind of features that we kind of expect around all of that. And then we've kind of had Planner, which has come into kind of just sort of like nudged in towards the side a little bit here and start to offer some functionality which allows us to plan from a individual level, from a small team level, integrates very nicely with things like Microsoft sort of Teams, and also as well fits within this kind of Dataverse universe, so to speak, with the ability to then tap into and then extend out using Power Platform capabilities, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. So that means that we can very easily and quickly go and extend things out. So the key issue that we've got at the moment is this here, in terms of Project Online going end of life later on this year. We'll kind of talk about what end of life kind of means and the impact this will have on all of you. So we're rapidly moving to this as being kind of the current or the future sort of landscape. So project operations being the evolution of what we've had from a PSA standpoint, with a lot of really great functionality sort of fed into there. I'm sure Rupert did a pretty good job earlier in terms of bringing you up to speed with what's in there. Certainly, when you look at the list of different sort of features and new innovations in this release wave, project operations by far and away, I think, has, objectively speaking, the most useful additions compared to some of the other CE applications, which is really great to sort of see. Planner kind of is sticking around on here. Planner has been kind of evolved a little bit. What used to be known as Project for the Web, if anyone used that before, that is now effectively known as Planner. still going to be there around all of this. And then, we still have this option here, Project Server Subscription Edition, which must be taken on premise and which will kind of offer what I would term to be feature parity with the Project Online capabilities that we have here today. But obviously, as it says there, needs to be on premise. So we'll kind of talk about, okay, why that may not be sort of ideal. So this is kind of the current landscape as we see today, and this is what we need to kind of be mindful of as we go forward from here. So hopefully it wasn't a surprise just then. It wasn't a surprise before you came here today that Project Online is sort of going. We've got a nice little sign over there to sort of give you a clue as well. So hopefully fairly obvious as part of this. What does this mean? It means that from today, it's impossible now for you to go and create new Project Online tenants or environments. That's been switched off as of this month. And then when we get to the end of September this year, it's going to be a case that at that point you will lose access to that in terms of all of the data that's in there, all of the project files, all of that good information in there will kind of be switched off at that particular point. So kind of sucks, I'm not going to beat around the bush around it. Why is it sort of happening? Well, the platform's kind of evolving. We've got legacy functionality from a SharePoint standpoint, which is kind of going away. So SharePoint Workflow Designer primarily. And we're kind of really entering a sort of phase now when we're looking at these AI investments. We need to be ensuring that we're aligning towards platforms that can support this. Platforms that's able to sort of interact with the data, is able to sort of, have these large language models ingest all this information in order to return really effective recommendations. So, and having all these different offerings here that's kind of being maintained doesn't really align to that. We want to be ensuring that we're sort of focused, okay, this is where we need to get to. We know AI is here to sort of stay. And, as a consequence, tools like Project Operations Planner and so on and so forth become very much the sort of the go-to point. And as we'll see a little bit later on with Project Operations specifically, there's quite a few really good AI sort of infused capabilities in there already today, which makes that quite a compelling sort of offering. So I would say if you're not already having a conversation in your businesses around all of this, then now is probably a good time to sort of act, because before you know it, we're going to be going into summer, having a nice lovely summer. It's going to be autumn again. We're already going to be thinking about things like Christmas and all this other good stuff. Time moves on, and the sooner that we can sort of prepare ourselves, the sooner we can sort of move forward, the better. So doesn't mean though necessarily we have to panic, because as we say in the UK, always important just to keep calm and carry on, be nice and calm in all things. And just, there's definitely something we can do here to ensure that we can get to a good point around all of this. So the official sort of options from Microsoft, which was sort of on the sort of a blog post that announced this. Option, Project Server Subscription Edition is subscription edition is going to offer you that comfort of giving you the same things that Project Online gives you today. That is also eventually going to have its own sort of end date. Microsoft is committed towards supporting, online first, software as a service first. I very much would suspect in the future, subscription edition or Project Server subscription edition will be kind of phased out. So effectively all you're doing is just delaying a problem. Why do a complete massive migration on premise with all that cost and all that time, and then 3 years later having to do another migration to get you all the way back on the cloud again? It's just not going to be a good use of anyone's time. So we need to be thinking forward about all this, being sort of efficient with our budget and all this sort of good stuff. So it sounds tempting. Okay, let's go on premise, have things the way they are. We don't need to change any ways of working. There's a litany of different reasons that we can sort of point to. But I don't know about you, I really hate managing servers. I hate managing things like Windows servers. I hate having to do updates on them. I hate having to figure out exactly which ports on Windows Firewall I need to open each time, what configuration I need to do, registry edit, group policy. It's horrible. This is why I'm working with SaaS, because I don't trust myself to be able to do all of that. I'd rather leave it with the experts. I'd rather have a nice software as a service sort of product with people who know how to do this stuff behind the scenes, people who are actually passionate about it, if you can be passionate about Windows Firewall. Maybe there's someone out there who knows. Rather let them handle it for me, and means that way I can just focus on running my business. I can focus on doing what I need to do with the application in question. As mentioned, this is a legacy solution. It's not going to receive these investments. It's not going to be seeing anything from an artificial intelligence standpoint. So if this is really on our agenda in terms of wanting to start to use AI a lot sort of more, then effectively we're not going to be in a good position to be able to execute on that at all. So for this reason, it's going to be, potentially quite, I say, we're just putting the problem in the post, as we'd say in the UK. We're just making this a problem that we're going to have to address sooner or later. And why would we want to put the business through that? Why would we want to put the business through that cost in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of money, and all this sort of good stuff? So turn our attention to Planner. Planner sounds good. Certainly, maybe from a licensing standpoint, it certainly sounds a lot more sort of attractive. It kind of has a good sort of familiar sort of feel around what we can do around all of this. All of the projects that I've been involved in where we've looked at Planner as a sort of replacement project online has resulted in quite a lot of effort, time, money, all this sort of good stuff, having to close the gap. And what I mean by closing the gap is going into things like the Power Platform, having to go and create new table objects, having to create new automations, plugins, approval workflows, a whole bunch of effort, which, okay, you might as well have just gone down the project operations route and just used that instead, because you potentially would have saved a lot of time, a lot of effort around all of that. Because when we look at Planner today, there are some very noticeable gaps. Time entries is a pretty important one. Not being able to go into Planner and be able to record your time entries. This is a key functionality area for pretty much every customer that I speak to who is using Project Online has a requirement for. And also as well, things like skills-based resource assignment, cost versus actuals. There's a whole, again, list of different sort of gaps on here that we're going to have to close. They can be closed. That's the benefit of the Power Platform. That's the benefit of being able to align towards that. But again, it takes time and effort. Things that we need to build and maintain, or you get somebody else to go and build and maintain. If you don't understand how it works, those changes become much more sort of complex. We want to be trying to, as much as possible, aligning ourselves in terms of, around the system rather than the other way around, because it just tends to become too challenging to maintain the solution, at all. And really as well, it also perhaps maybe misses an opportunity. Okay, what can we do here around optimizing our processes? Okay, yes, we've done things a certain way for 10, 15 years, but have we actually sat down and actually questioned, okay, why are we doing it this way? Is it just because, that's how somebody showed me how to do it one of these days? Is it because, I'm too scared to make a change because somebody might shout at me if something happens? We really miss an opportunity here to actually look at our processes. Are our processes actually serving us, or is it going to be the other way around? So for this reason, Planner might not be the best option to sort of look at, when we consider the gap that we need to close around all of this. But obviously, we want to be fair and balanced here, and obviously give you a good view around all of this. In terms of what we do have, is some pretty good things in terms of things like close integration with Microsoft Teams, being able to do all of that within a single application. If we can get users to a point where, they're not having to constantly context switch between different apps, then surprisingly, they have a much more enjoyable time. We can reduce that fatigue, all that sort of good stuff. The ability to manage our work breakdown structures in kind of a good sort of way, integrations across the Microsoft 365 sort of stack, the ability to scale from just maybe a simple plan to a more complex project with maybe a team and other people in there as well. And it's quick and easy to set up. And we know that today, as of today with Planner, we have the ability to go into the Power Platform to extend that as needed. So potentially for some smaller scenarios, potentially for some situations, it will be preferable. As mentioned, certainly from a licensing standpoint, when we look at P3 and P5, again, maybe the business case is being sold there. But again, we need to be sort of taking a fair look in terms of, yes, the license cost may be lower, but what we're actually paying in terms of time, in terms of cost. There'll always be a cost factor that will be incredibly obvious for the bean counters in the organization, but also as well time cost, the time of actually having to have somebody in the business having to maintain and sort of run this solution, and that needs to be factored in if we're going to be doing a fair kind of assessment around all of this. So think of this being good for these different scenarios as we've seen here. We kind of already talked about all of these sort of touching points already. One thing we didn't mention is that, the Planner application does have, I term it kind of support for program and portfolio management in the form of roadmaps. Roadmaps are nice, but they can cause some potential issues because in terms of how the planner application manages that data from a roadmap standpoint, if you're using things like Dataverse environments to manage your individual planner environments, all of the data for roadmaps is kind of routed into the default environment, which if you're anyone like me working with Power Platform each day, you know that the default environment is kind of a bit of a nightmare. We try and always want to close that down as much as possible, and means that we don't have that nice data integrity around all of that. And it's not really true portfolio program management, certainly nowhere near compared to what I think Rudy and Manuel sort of showed you before in terms of functionality that we as a proMX can maybe bring into the party here. So yeah, these are the sort of things to do. So we're not discounting Planner here. We just want to be totally open and transparent in terms of, okay, yes, it can work, but you need to be sort of hitting these touching points over here. And yeah, potentially, yeah, it will work for you in that sort of scenario. So turning the conversation towards project operations, obviously we are a little bit biased on this front. There's no beating around the bush there. This is going to offer you, I think, the most in terms of features, the most in terms of the parity, but still with the same kind of capabilities and the benefits that Planner affords you, because it is sort of built on top of what we have from a Power Platform standpoint. So whether we're managing sort of more simple and more complex projects, we need to be able to track things like time and expenses. We need the ability to be able to manage resources in a really sort of nice and effective way. We want to be able to tap into embedded agentic or Copilot based experiences. Then I think project operations does tick the box in quite a few different sort of areas around all of this. Plus as well, if we're thinking very strategically here, once we align into project operations for one functionality area, we know that we can then tap into the other Dynamics 365 modules, things like sales, customer service, customer insights journeys, perhaps, all of these other modules that are there and can be integrated very nicely and very seamlessly. So we can kind of get to a point where we're running all aspects of our business using this platform, which hopefully will help us out, make things more straightforward, all this sort of good stuff. So looking at how the platform is kind of built out, so we obviously have Dynamics 365 project operations down here. We have our Dataverse environment right down at the bottom, the ability to tap into additional integration capabilities. As I'm probably sure you're aware, we have a native integration with F&O or Finance Operations, whatever it's called, and as well the ability to kind of also integrate with other ERPs, usually via some form of integration, using things like the Power Platform connectors, Microsoft Azure, all this sort of good stuff here. And around all of this, potentially the value that we can then bring into the equation here will be around the proMX sort of IP, intellectual property, things like absence management, project portfolio to kind of fill in some of the gaps that we see there. So really gives you a lot here in terms of what we can do with the Power Platform underneath. It means that we can build out, Canvas and model-driven apps. We can have Power to make workflows or flows. We could have external websites with Power Pages. We can build out Copilot Studio agents. A lot of functionality in there that we can tap into and kind of use to make things a bit sort of easier. Now, the application is kind of catered towards different sort of personas and sort of experiences. So these will differ based on the organizations that typically we do, whether we are maybe more concerned with managing internal projects, or if we wanted to sell those as part of this. But regardless of who we are in the organization, there's going to be potentially a way for us to be able to manage all of this and be able to get some value out of this, whether I'm just submitting my time entries on a day-to-day basis, whether I'm wanting to generate my pro forma or actual invoicing from the application, whether I'm just wanting to understand what's going on with our projects and things like that, then the functionality that we have in here is going to really help us as part of all of that. So this here is kind of, a lot of text, simple messages. There's a lot in the box here. And we can the benefit here is that we can just kind of pick and choose what we want around all of this. And we start to appreciate with this, the better alignment that we have with Project Online around certain key functionality areas around all of this. And certainly, time entries is one of those big scenarios that I'm seeing at the moment. In conversation with customers, it's a very essential thing that needs to be sort of done. With project operations, we have us covered there. If we're going down other routes, like Planner, for example, that's not going to be there out of the box. We need to go and actually custom build it, and famous phrase, don't know if there's a German equivalent, why reinvent the wheel? It's that sort of symbol here. Use what's here so we can realize value a lot faster. So we've got something that's going to be supported and maintained by Microsoft into the future, and therefore it's less of a concern for us to sort of manage and maintain. So we're talking a lot about AI at the moment. It's kind of our mandatory sort of topic, unfortunately. But again, the benefits of the project operations solution is, okay, these agentic capabilities built into the platform, some of which I think Rupert may have shared with you earlier today. Others that we can go in and build ourselves as well, because again, we can use the Copilot Studio sort of experience to go and build these custom agents. Oops. Those agents can then be integrated very seamlessly with the built-in Copilot that project operations has. So it means that I just have, again, one interface over here. I just chat to my Copilot. It knows about all the different agents that are happening behind the scenes, and it can start to achieve these different scenarios here. Simple information retrieval scenarios, maybe going into a system and maybe performing some kind of sort of task, or just completely orchestrating itself on demand. So maybe as soon as we get an email through from a customer confirming, okay, yep, the project can be executed, an agent can then run in the background. It could go and maybe set up the project, scaffold it out based on a template, send out some approval workflows, do all of this stuff behind the scenes without us needing to even raise a finger. These we're seeing more and more increasingly are the more interesting scenarios that we have here in terms of what we can do with this new agentic capabilities. Certainly some pretty impressive things there. So as mentioned, with the project operation application, we get a lot of really nice infused AI and Copilot-based capability. This is just a snapshot here in terms of what we have here today, some of which you may have seen demos for. So again, really just makes it very easy for us to start to see get some value out of generative AI in a very easy sort of way, without us needing really to lift a finger. This is all kind of part and parcel of the of our subscription that we purchase on there, and we can be assured that over time that more investment is going to be happening around all of this, and we're going to get even more capability as well around all of this. Now, at the moment, the project operations product is using planner functionality underneath the hood in terms of being able to manage our work breakdown structure. So we can get the same kind of benefits that if we were to go down the planner route, the ability to manage our projects, manage our dependencies, have our sort of critical paths sort of mapped out, nice sort of Kanban-based sort of views and all that sort of stuff. Support for things like custom columns, the ability to import in from an MPP file. So we kind of don't lose anything here, really, when we're looking at it. If we can still have everything that Planner can give us, but project operations just offers that little bit more, which I think really moves us forward in a good sort of way. So it's really kind of a win-win scenario from that standpoint in terms of having these capabilities around all of this. If our organization is selling projects quite frequently, if you're a professional services firm like us, and we use this tool internally, so hopefully that gives you some assurance that it is kind of fit for purpose there. We can manage off everything from our lead to our opportunity, generate our quotations, estimate those quotations based on a work breakdown structure, issue that out, and then manage all aspects of that, from the initial sort of execution all the way through to delivery, and then the back end of the tool then drive our invoicing out as well. And in our case, we use project operations to drive our invoicing. Our pro forma invoice is driven from the system. So in a few days' time, my accounting team will ask me to go and approve all the time entries in the tool. I'll then also need to then review all the invoices, again, generated from the tool itself, get those approved, those are then sent out to our end customers. So it means we can really optimize our workflows here, particularly for time material projects, and really quite a boon here. Budgeting and forecasting, another key thing that we tend to see usually for most project online sort of scenarios. So the ability to not only estimate, but also monitor ongoing costs, being able to have that handbrake in place. If things are going a bit too fast, or if we're maybe consuming budget too quickly, we can manage this in a really nice and effective sort of way with different sort of views on here to be able to view our sort of in progress, being able to see, if we need to make some adjustments there, whether we're using too much time or too less, all of this is kind of built into the tool itself. In terms of additional Copilot capabilities, the ability for us to suggest resource assignments. So using data in the tool itself, it's able to kind of crunch over that and basically go, okay, well, I can see that Joe's been assigned to similar project tasks in the past. I can see that Joe has some capacity at the moment. So why don't we propose him for this project over here? Because he's going to be a good fit as part of that. We can see over here, we then basically get a list of all the different potential, I keep saying resources. Resources sounds kind of horrible and clinical. Our colleagues, our talents, We can see a list of all of our talent in here in the organization. We can see whether they are sort of, best fit for all of this, who they are, go down deeper around all of that, and then assign them to that based on those suggestions. So again, this is this agentic AI sort of capability factored in as part of this, because data is being stored in Dataverse. It's able to crunch over that on a regular basis, and then from there, be able to do these sort of suggestions, based on how Project Online is structured in terms of using the SharePoint functionality and everything else. It's going to be impossible, for an agent or any large language model to reason over that. And we're looking now what we have here from Project Operations and Dataverse. This becomes a lot more easier as a consequence. Time tracking is a very popular thing. Obviously, if you're like me, you need to go into your system every single day, mainly every single day. I might forget some days perhaps. Go in and sort of track your time, and this needs to be done in a very nice and sort of easy way. So we have a new sort of time tracking sort of experience within the sort of the tool itself, and also as well a new mobile app as well. This forms part of some of the intellectual property that we sold to Microsoft last year. So it's good, therefore. So really designed to make it very nice and easy for us to go and be able to, enter our time and just take the drudgery out of all of this. And again, investments going into this to make the approval cycle a lot easier, the approvals agent, which I think was spoken about earlier on today. We're trying to be as effective and as efficient with people's time as possible, because if you're a consultant like me, that this is kind of like, right, I've got to go do my time entries for the day. So the more we can make this easier, the more we can sort of drive forward with this, the better it will be. Expense management that the application includes as well. Again, this is useful from a budgetary standpoint, being able to sort of manage all of this very nice and very easily, with more advanced capabilities if we are integrating with F&O as part of this. Otherwise, you get kind of a straightforward and simple expense management experience in the core version of the application. And then support for various different types of projects. Time and material being the most common one that we sort of deliver, but yeah, there will be scenarios where it's a fixed price, where we need to do more complex billing schedules, maybe based on milestones, based on certain dates. We need to drive invoicing based on specific dates. Again, this is all native functionality in ProJobs, something that we don't have to go and replicate each time, if we were to go and use Planner or something else like that. So again, it's something that could be useful for your own scenario. So I've thrown a lot of information at you. Appreciate that. It's getting close to the end of the day as well. But yeah, hopefully I've made the point very clear in terms of, okay, well, Planner is a great solution. I'm not going to talk it down at all, but it's not going to really be able to meet some of the challenges which I think most organizations who are using Project Online today are sort of facing with. And we need to have a much more capable solution that can help us as part of all of this. As we've kind of spoken about quite extensively already, moving back onto premise is just kind of putting a very expensive plaster on the whole situation. We're kind of just, okay, let's just put this down the road. Maybe I'll change jobs by then. Maybe it's not my problem anymore in a few years sort of time. It's that sort of mindset, which you don't really want to be sort of entertaining. So, the key message I would have here today is, okay, consider Project Operations, because it's going to offer that parity. It's going to give you that scale for the future. AI investments, single source of truth, all of these nice little buzzwords that you hear, from all these CTOs that they've got in place in their organizations and stuff like that. You can be like them as well. Project Operations helps deliver it. I think I sold that well. So yeah, these are the kind of things that we can sort of do around all of this, and really just make sure that we are recognizing, okay, artificial intelligence is kind of here to stay. If we're not really well equipped from a technology standpoint, we're not going to be able to reap the benefits of any of this, And certainly, if we're not going to do that, our competitors will. And the people who don't move forward in this are the ones that are going to be left in the dust, unfortunately. So, title of the session is, okay, how we can make this as easy as possible. What I wanted to share now is just some tips and tricks, things to consider if you are embarking on this journey yourself. Some of the things that I would advise you to take a look at, some of the things that will hopefully maybe allow you to sort of better plan what you can do from a migration standpoint. So sort of look at some of these in a bit more sort of detail, and hopefully this will be our sort of gift to you in terms of things that you can go away and start thinking about. So as mentioned, the Project Operations application supports the ability to do the MPP file imports. So there is a scenario, okay, from a migration standpoint, okay, we can go into Project Online, we can export out our existing projects into these raw sort of files, and then very easily import them into the Project Operations tool. So this could be one way in which we can sort of make this a bit sort of easier on all of us. Now, granted, this is all well and good if we've got maybe 20 or 30 sort of projects. If there's going to be more projects beyond that, then potentially there are other routes that we need to consider, and we'll sort of talk about those as well. The key thing to keep in mind with this is there are some limitations. So if you've got particularly complex MPP files, so what I mean by that is, okay, very complex dependencies, if you've got things like resource assignments, if you've got sub-projects in those MPP files, there's a list of different things, custom fields and so on and so forth. These are not something that's going to be replicated across when you do the import. Microsoft on the Learn website publishes a full list of all the potential limitations. So it's going to be important that you just make sure that you are aware of those, and they don't present a potential issue for you when doing this. And again, going back to my earlier point, this might be an opportunity for you actually to go and look at, okay, are we overcomplicating these MPP files? Okay, why do we need to have an MPP file with 50,000 tasks in there? Why do we need to have all these complex dependencies? Are we just creating a rod for our own back, as we'd say in the UK, or just creating work for the sake of doing it? So may afford an opportunity here just to be a bit of to optimize things around all of this. Potentially, if you've got quite a small volume of projects to migrate, potentially, if the complexity is quite sort of small, this can be a good and easy way for you to get things into the project operations universe. You import the MPP file, it does kind of a background operation where it's hitting a few different APIs. Then, hey presto, a few minutes later, your project is in there with the full work breakdown structure, all the relevant details, and you can kind of go forward from there. So definitely use this to help you with this migration. As I say, potentially for smaller scenarios, could be quite a good way for you to sort of do this. For the more complex scenarios, if we're wanting to use the full planner capabilities in the tool to have the work breakdown structure, the project desktop-like sort of experience, then we're going to have to deal with the schedule API at some particular sort of point. The schedule API is what sits behind the scenes to basically ensure that, okay, what we are doing on the planner board is acceptable to both planner and acceptable to both Dataverse. So basically, if we, as a developer, if I was to go in by default, go into the project table, the project task table, and try and do a create or an update against that, a plugin is going to basically step in and go, no, you can't do this. This needs to go through the schedule API instead. So there's some restrictions by Microsoft that prevent us from doing those direct create, update, delete operations. Instead, we have to go and always hit the schedule API. And how the schedule API kind of works is, okay, we tell schedule API, okay, here's some things I want to do. Here's a list of all the things I want to do. I'm going to submit the things that I want to do to you. Schedule API sort of goes, okay, yeah, fine. Yep, looks good. Okay, there you go. I've made the changes. Or alternatively, it sort of goes, okay, well, you kind of made a mistake there. You're trying to do something which isn't supported. Here's an error. So it's kind of like a background operation that needs to be executed and where all the changes need to be sort of effective in order to go forward from there. So kind of think of it maybe as like a complex transaction behind the scenes. So this is something, if you're planning quite a large-scale migration, certainly the ones that we are involved in will always involve the schedule API unless we're using something called external scheduling. We're going to have to get our head around these APIs at some point. The good news is that these are effectively Dataverse actions or custom APIs, if you've heard of those. So it's possible to use tools like Power to make cloud flows to be able to call and execute them. We can also as well write some custom code that goes through them as well. There's also as well some things to note in terms of, I guess, some limitations, not terms of limitations per se, but just considerations. So for example, each user is limited to a certain number of active operation sets at any particular time. There's a limit in terms of the number of operations in an operation set. You need to ensure the user has a project license. Terms and conditions may apply. Schedule API, it should only be used in a controlled environment. Blah, blah, blah. All those things that you hear on those super long US adverts for Docs Self Facility or whatever they're calling it this month, whatever. So just keep in mind that going onto the Learn website, being able to sort of look at all of those, that will just make sure you have a bit of an easier way of going around all of that. But this is something you need to sort of think about. My top tips for you, just don't underestimate the potential work involved as part of this. And it may be that perhaps maybe going down the externally scheduled route, if you're not looking to have the planner type functionality in place, this might be something for you to consider perhaps. We have a huge debate usually when it comes to, okay, how do we go about address any gaps. Do we want to go and customize the system further? Do we want to do things more configuration type sort of approach? So it's useful just to kind of explain what these different sort of terms mean. Configuration can be sort of seen as anything that we do maybe from a Power Platform standpoint. I go into a form on the project table, I go and add some custom columns, rearrange some things on there. These are standard kind of configurations that we can do in a very easy and straightforward way. It's not going to require a lot of effort. It's going to be something that's going to be supported by Microsoft, and it can kind of help us to close the gaps around all of this. So this is where, potentially make our lives a bit easier by trying to take more of a configuration approach. Try and just see how we can fit our processes around the system as much as possible, rather than trying to fight against it. Most common issues that I've seen with project operations projects when I'm brought in for a project rescue or something like that is where we've done too much of this. We've tried to fit around, we've tried to go and write some plugins, we've tried to completely over-engineer the entire product, get it to basically work in anger with our own particular processes. So the platform will let us do that. I can go and create a plugin using C#, I can go and do some Azure extensibility, I can do all of this sort of stuff. But the question is, okay, why are we doing this? Is it because we're just trying to fit around this process because we're just too stubborn to kind of change things or to consider other approaches? What harm is this doing overall to our implementation? What harm is this kind of doing to maintainability? Ideally, as an organization, we want to be able to own this solution. We don't want to be having to call the likes of us each time to fix a problem. Or of course, we'll happily help. We're not going to say no to it, but obviously we're going to be charging you for that and all that sort of stuff. Or you're going to have to find resources internally who know how to maintain all of this. So really the temptation is, okay, right, I'll go deep into this. I'll do a bunch of customization, but really you're going to be, as I mentioned before, creating a rod for your own back, making things more difficult for you. So to make things as easy as possible, configure as much as possible, use the native capabilities, keep things straightforward, keep it simple, stupid, KISS. I say that all the time. It just means that we can ultimately make sure that we can maintain this. We're fitting in around what Microsoft are kind of doing. So we're not going to have those pressure points, those long regression tests after a big update, things like that. And we're making our lives easier. I'm sure we all want an easy life at the end of the day. Certainly I do. It means less firefighting, less having to jump into calls, and all this sort of good stuff. AI. So actually, AI is being used in the product quite a lot these days, as we sort of see, offers quite a lot of things from an end user standpoint. When we're planning something like a migration, AI can also help as part of this. With what we're seeing now from a large language model standpoint, we can do quite a lot actually. We can do things like, for example, create test data. I can use GitHub Copilot to generate me test cases in Playwright that I can then go and execute against that. I can use GitHub Copilot to go and vibe a plugin or an application that can go and execute those scheduled APIs that we mentioned sort of before. All of this and more can be sort of done. So actually, by encouraging ourselves to actually take the plunge by, opening up GitHub Copilot or Claude or whatever for the first time and actually just experimenting around, you'd be surprised what we can actually do, what we can scaffold very sort of easily, what we can empower our internal developer teams with to be able to let them go further. So our development teams, example at proMX, are using things like GitHub Copilot as part of their daily workflow, and it does offer a lot of benefit there. It means you can work from so much more faster, deal with a lot of these hurdles yourself, and go forward from there. So don't underestimate how AI can sort of help us with this in terms of being able to plan things out, generating code snippets, generating sort of test data. It does this really, really well. It kind of, and I find myself continually surprised just in terms of how effective this can really sort of be and how much really of a productivity game changer this can be around all of this. So again, use this to help you make this. Use this to help you make things easier for you as you're planning your migration, as you're kind of moving forward and really trying to sort of do things in the time we've got. We've got limited time. So the more help we can get, the more that AI can help us with that, the better it's going to be. So appreciate that, we are, we've got a deadline over here. There's a lot to kind of think about. There's only so much that we can sort of talk about in the time that we've got over here. To help address the concerns that we're seeing with a lot of our customers at the moment, we do offer a free assessment workshop to all of our customers, where we come in and we kind of take a full, deeper view of your own sort of particular scenarios, because there's no two organisations who are the same when it comes to Project Online, how they're using it, what they wanted to achieve from a sort of a long-term sort of basis. So for this reason, we've got an assessment that you can go and complete. If you just scan the QR code over there, or just come find me or one of my colleagues afterwards, we can kind of talk you through what the process is. Generally involves answering a bit of a Q&A, jumping on a call from there, and we can then start to then really sort of plan, okay, what's going to be the best solution for you, what will give you a recommendation that you can go forward with, and just give you that sort of bit of a helping hand here. And this is kind of like a free, kind of no obligation kind of thing around all of this. So yeah, use our experience, use our sort of expertise here. You know, we have done a lot of these. You know, we can point out the common pitfalls and hopefully guide you towards, you know, something that's going to be best for you as an organisation, and also make sure that you can get through this, you know, the retirement project online and not be impacted too much by it. In terms of other things that we can do as well, hopefully you're sort of kind of aware of all of this, but yeah, we can help you with the licensing potentially as a CSP provider. We've got a lot of that capability in the group itself, particularly as well from a pro developer extensibility. So a lot of experience there building out these integrations. Training standpoint, I myself am a certified trainer. We have other certified trainers across the group as well, so we can help in terms of being able to do these kind of sort of dedicated training sessions. Did a few last year for customers. Also as well doing a lot of training around AI enablement, all this sort of stuff at the moment as well. As you hopefully are aware, we've got a very, very good relationship with our Microsoft colleagues through things like the Inner Circle partners as well, thanks to the fact that we've got amazing MVPs like my colleague Sebastian there in the back. Say hi, Sebastian. Yeah, always have to embarrass them, unfortunately. So yeah, we are privy to a lot of information in terms of the strategic roadmap, in terms of what's happening with these products more generally. So we can sort of guide you kind of in the right sort of direction, and you know, hopefully offer some value and benefit around all of that. I've already spoken about the free assessment. Do take advantage of that. You know, it's going to help you. Any help that you can get through any of this is going to be important. You know, learn from others, learn from the experts, rather than trying to figure all this out by yourself. So they always say you should end a presentation with some homework or call to action. So you should be thinking about this already. If you're using Project Online, you know, it's kind of at the point, it's kind of at a non-negotiable stage now where, okay, if you ignore this problem any longer, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, the summer's going to be over. We're going to be packing up the barbecues, coming back from our summer holidays, and we've got this big mammoth problem to deal with. Let's not put ourselves in this situation. Let's try and act forward as part of that, and you know, be proactive. So leverage the free assessment. This is our kind of gift to you to sort of help you with all of this, and we can jump on a call and go into a bit more detail around all of this. Find the best solution for you. Could be, you know, find either a partner or a trusted advisor. Could be us, could be someone else. Have somebody in your corner who can help you as part of all of this. So again, you're not having to figure out all of these steps on your own. And once you've done the assessment, if you've got any questions or anything you want to ask us again, we're more than happy to have a conversation. Me and my colleagues who are here, you know, we live and breathe this stuff every single day. You know, we like talking about this stuff. Would you believe it? So, you know, this is really what we're here for, what we want to try and help and offer you with. So do take advantage of that, and yet make sure you go forward from there.